on reflection, my personal highlight came many years later when I was living in John Aaron's house in Sheffield. And John and I really enjoyed soloing, and we went soloing a lot together, and we'd climb in the evenings after work. We would climb sometimes 100 routes over an evening on the gritstone edges. And by soloing, we're climbing without any ropes. It might be called free climbing in the mainstream media. So the consequences are very significant. You're very likely to kill yourself if you fall off. And for any of the climbers out there, we were regularly climbing to about E4 on site on the grit. Most of the climbing was easier than that, but we were climbing at pretty reasonable standard. And over many years, we built up a head of steam. And then I think it was 2003, we climbed 500 routes in a day. I think we climbed them over 18 hours. It was a really phenomenal effort, and nothing like that had been done before. And it was a real feat of endurance, like physical endurance, but like mental endurance as well, to stay focused and stay in the zone flow when you're climbing like that.
What was nutrition like as you're doing it? Did you carry things? I'm guessing you have to make a reasonable amount of distance between the routes as well.
You set your own rules for these challenges, and this was a supported challenge. So we were in a car driving between the crags and then parking the car and running to the crag, and we'd climb for a couple of hours, and then you'd move to a different crag to carry on climbing. So support was quite easy. Nutrition was easy. We had a giant Tupperware of pasta and various kind of bars and snacks to eat as well. So it's very different to like a self-supported mountain running challenge where you're carrying everything for yourself throughout the challenge. So the 500 routes in a day, that was fairly simple nutrition.
So were you kind of scared about the idea of like 500 routes if you're soloing, super tired, and if you've never been to that place, but you could also die quite easily? What was going through your mind?
When I think back now, I don't recall being scared about it. Maybe a bit apprehensive about whether I would be able to climb 500 routes. That was an absolute unknown. I'd never done anything of that magnitude before. I don't recall being scared about it, more worried about failure to achieve the goal. But I do think you've touched on a really important point there, and that is how uncertainty gives you true adventure. And that is absolutely the ethos that I've taken to the events that I now organise. We organise some really hard, challenging races. Sometimes the majority of people who enter don't even finish. But what you get is an incredibly powerful experience. And when people want life-changing, life-affirming event race experiences, you are just not going to get that doing parkrun. You have to go and do something where there is a genuine sense of adventure. And you only get that when there's a bit of jeopardy. And you only get that when there's no uncertainty in the outcome. So you have to have uncertainty. It's absolutely a key ingredient to adventure.
That definitely is one of the ones that I struggle with in terms of, I asked with you, in terms of the uncertainty of it, but along with the riskiness of also dying. Uncertainty is the bit where the challenge arrives, but then if the uncertainty is something that could then kill you, it's a bit of a hard one to feel responsible in doing, so much now that I'm a bit older and realize that there are other people that get impacted by me dying besides just me. Whereas things like running an ultramarathon, which if you don't finish it, it just sort of shows you what your limits are and it's really nice for you. Whereas not finishing a route because you've fallen off it, because your arm's given up, would suck a bit more.
So I think whilst for an individual personal challenge, I'm prepared to accept potential death as an end result of getting it wrong. It's really important to say that it's not like you're going out with a death wish, far from it. You are prepared to accept a very high level of risk, and it'd be interesting to talk about that soloing mindset in a moment. But in terms of the events that we organise, there's the risk of dying at one of our events is very minimal, I would hope, but the risk of being unable to complete the event because of the physical nature of the challenge, that's pretty high. And that will push people into new places, and they can be uncomfortable places as they find out what their limits are. That can be an incredibly rewarding and enriching experience. That's part of what we do at the events.
I think it's one of like the existential points of kind of living is wanting to have like a legacy or whatever. It's also just wanting to live your life knowing that you did all the things that you could do and the stuff that you just don't even know that you could achieve unless you really try and go to like the depths that you haven't explored. I definitely get asked like why I bother to do stupid stuff. And I'm like, because I don't want to get to the point where I'm too old and dying and thinking that I've never actually tried. And yeah, it's just really nice that events like yours exist where you can facilitate in a safe way, allowing me to kind of actually be my crazy self and actually do the things that make me me. So thanks. And then you're saying around how you do that in terms of risk. So I'm certainly thinking about doing a lot more mountain climbing as well myself. And there's just so much more risk on those side of things. So definitely a different mindset that's super related.
So I think the mindset that you need to get into if we're thinking about risk on a personal level now is really interesting. And I think as you become more extreme in the level of risk you're prepared to take, being in the right mindset is absolutely essential for success. This little challenge I've done this summer, which is classic rock in the Lake District. So very briefly, this is climbing all of the classic rock climbs that are defined in a book called Classic Rock. It involves about 50 kilometers of running through the mountains in the Lake District. It's 15 different rock climbs at 9 different crags, and they're relatively easy by modern standards. Again, for the climbers listening, the hardest route is probably Mossgiel Grooves on Scafell Crag, which is graded very severe VS. But to try and set a record here, I was soloing again, so there's no ropes, in my fell running shoes. That's fairly unusual approach. And getting into the mindset that that's okay is really important. And I really strongly feel when you're soloing and you're doing it regularly, you need to accept and to have come to terms with the consequences of your actions. You need to have accepted if you fall off, you're going to die. And if you cannot accept that, then you have no place soloing. For the people who don't really think about it, they are the ones that get scared and have those kind of disco leg moments as the adrenaline becomes overwhelming. Those are the people that look sketchy when they're climbing. A good way of looking at it is for anyone who has been climbing, even with a rope, that everyone knows that every now and then your foot will pop off. You'll grab a handhold and you'll get it the wrong way. You won't get it the optimal way, or you'll climb a sequence the wrong way, which makes it harder. And you suddenly find yourself awkwardly placed and off balance because your hands are the wrong way round or something like that. And these are the normal things that happen when you're rock climbing with a rope. And I think some people forget is these are normal things that happen when you are soloing as well. You will read a sequence of holds wrong. Your foot will pop off at some point. And to be the master of your emotions, the master of your fear when that happens, you have to fundamentally accept what you're doing and not be scared by it. So when your foot pops off and you control that with a bit of body tension, and because you're moving carefully, you've got 3 points of contact, it's not a problem. It doesn't scare you. Doing classic rock this summer, there were moments where my foot popped off. I got my hands the wrong way round, but I was mentally ready for that. And consequently, it wasn't scary.
I had a moment where I nearly fell off the Matterhorn, but I was pretty chill about it. Still, it wasn't that level. I definitely concluded that I accepted like nearly dying on things, but I figured that for me, soloing, I'm nowhere near the skill anyway. It doesn't really make that much sense, but I still think that I'm probably just never going to bother going down that route. It just feels so centered, and something I struggle with is like maybe finding flow, which is why I do these things, and like back to the very unhinged nature of our minds from the start. So like something else I thought about doing in my life is like being a surgeon, because in the kind of moments where everything is life and death, I just find it very peaceful, and you just know what your priorities are exactly. And there's nothing else to really think about besides just doing the important thing. So it's just like a space for my head that's really nice. So in that sense, I'm like, oh, maybe soloing would be perfect for me. But otherwise, I'm also like, there's probably other ways I can maybe satisfy this itch without doing something where I maybe die. Probably also I'm just never going to be skilled enough. But maybe that's a bad mindset.
I think that's why people search for these challenges. And I think most people are searching for some expressive challenge. It's just some people do parkrun, and that's right for them. Some people will go and try and do the Dragon's Back race, and some people will combine ultra running and soloing. There's levels to everything, and there's always somebody who can go one better, always. And it's about finding what works for you, that happy place for you, and not necessarily happy in the moment of the challenge of doing whatever your challenge is, think about Dragon's Back participants and how physically and emotionally demanding the event is. If you ask them in that moment, could I press an ejector seat button and send them back to the comfort of their home and just end it all? Quite a lot of them would take that option. But when they finish the race and they have that incredible satisfaction of an immense challenge completed, I mean, that is priceless. That is what all of that suffering along the way is about.
I certainly had some of those moments when I was climbing the Matterhorn, to be fair, where I was like, just didn't really enjoy it. You have to wake up at 4 a.m. in the dark and you're climbing sort of with like a mile drop either side of you. And you're just like, I don't like it. I'm not tied to anything. What's going on? Actually, I kind of want to go back right now. But then going back was just as scary as going forwards. And I was like, well, I've done it. I've put myself here. I may as well just carry on because of either way, it seems just as dumb. There's no ejector seat. And it was definitely one of the best experiences of my life to date. Certainly I found that with the ultramarathons that I've done. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for those kind of things.